Hi, I'm Bob Stelflew. I work in the R&D department as a design engineer at Team Associated, and I'm going to give you a few tips about the TC5. Typically there are three things that are often overlooked in the setup of touring cars. All three of them are very critical considering the speeds that we're going around the track and the traction levels that we have. One of the first things that we like to look at on the cars is camber. It's very important that the camber be set equal left and right on the car. Generally, with foam tire racing, we like to run 2 degrees of camber in the rear of the car. And again, that should be equal left and right. Up front on the car, we may run a little bit more than that, 2.5 or 3 degrees. Again, camber is a very sensitive adjustment on the car, and you can use that to adjust the amount of steering that you'll have. Less camber in the front of the car will generally give you less steering. So when we run 2.5 or 3 degrees of camber up front, we're doing that to get more steering into the car, to help it rotate through the corner. If the car becomes too aggressive and picks up tires, then we take camber out of the car. We'll back down to 2 degrees, maybe even 1.5 degrees. In extreme situations, even 1 degree of camber up front. So camber is often overlooked in the setup. It should be set equal left to right and can be used to adjust the steering. Another thing I'd like to talk about are droop settings. Droop settings again are very critical on the car. Similar to camber settings, they should be set equal left to right. Not always the same front to rear, but equal left to right. In foam tire racing on carpet, most of our team guys will run a measurement of 4 for the droop in the rear, which is measured with the droop gauge underneath the lower hinge pin. And again, should be equal both sides, and our team guys will run 5 in the front. Droop can be adjusted to affect the way the car handles around the track. Generally, the more droop that you have in the car, or the lower the number is on the gauge, the more that end of the car will roll. So you can use a relative amount of droop front to rear to limit the car's pitching movements, and you can limit droop altogether to limit roll in the car. On asphalt, for instance, we'll run more droop in the car, and this is to get the car to pitch more front to rear and to roll more left to right. So in conditions where traction levels are low and you want more steering in the car, generally you'll run more rear droop. So in foam tires we would go from 4 to maybe 3.5. If the traction levels are very high, we might run less rear droop, so we'd go from 4 to 4.5. Alright, and the last overlooked point on the touring car setups would be ride height. Ride height again is very critical, like camber and droop, and should be set equal left to right like camber and droop. Typically on foam tire carpet racing we'll run ride heights between 4 and 4.5 millimeters depending on the smoothness of the track. And that ride height is always measured below the droop screw on the chassis. Ride height can also be a very important tuning option to add or take away steering. And we do this by changing the relative ride height from front to rear. Generally, like I said, we'll run 4 to 4.5 millimeters of ride height on the touring cars on carpet racing. If we want more steering in the car, we'll lower the front relative to the rear, so we may run 4.25 in the front and 4.5 in the rear, or an even bigger split like 4 millimeters in the front and 4.5 in the rear. So raking the car forward or slanting the car more towards the nose will give you more steering, and you can do that by changing the ride height.